on the one hand, and the affinity between two souls on the other. The vulgar love of the body takes wing and flies away when the bloom of youth is over, but the noble love of the soul is perpetual. And then comes the comic poet Aristophanes with a brand new theory about love. In the olden days, he tells us, the two sexes were united into one body. This body was round like a ball, with 4 hands, 4 feet, and 2 faces. It moved about with amazing rapidity, using its 8 limbs like the spokes of a wheel in a continual series of somersaults. Terrible was the strength of this race of men-women, and boundless was their ambition. They were planning to scale the heavens and to attack the gods when Zeus hit upon a happy plan. "Let us cut them in 2, he said, "and then they will have only half their strength, and we shall have twice as many sacrifices." And so he split them apart into male and female, and from that day onward the 2 halves of the once united body have been consumed with a longing to be reunited into one. And this longing for the reunion of the sexes is what we call love. This humorous interpretation of love is followed by several other interesting definitions, until finally the guest of honor, Socrates, is requested to make a few remarks on the subject. "After all this eloquence," begins Socrates, "I am turned into stone and struck dumb. For how can my foolishness compete with such wisdom?" And, having unburdened himself of this Socratic preface of ironic modesty, he proceeds to confute all their wisdom with his foolishness. He tears down their arguments with a series of unanswerable questions. Socrates was the founder of the quiz method in education, and then he follows this destructive process with a constructive theory of his own. "Love," he observes, "is the hunger of the human soul for divine beauty. The lover is eager not only to find beauty, but to create it, to perpetuate it, to plant the seed of immortality in the mortal body. This is why the sexes love each other, to reproduce themselves and thus to prolong time into eternity. And this is why parents love their children. For the soul of the loving parent creates not merely children, but seekers and partners and co-workers and successors in the eternal quest for beauty." And what is this beauty that we are all seeking to perpetuate through love? It is wisdom and virtue and honor and courage and justice and faith. In a word, beauty is truth. And truth is the way that leads directly to God. The guests applaud the speech of the barefoot philosopher, and then they proceed to the more prosaic business of the evening. They enter into a drinking contest which lasts all through the night. One by one the revelers drop out of the contest until at cockcrow there are only 3 left: Aristophanes, Agathon, and Socrates. They are drinking out of a large goblet which they pass around, and Socrates is explaining to the 2 poets, who are half asleep, that the great writer of comedy should also be a great writer of tragedy. And first Aristophanes falls asleep, and then, as the day is dawning, Agathon. Socrates lays them gently to rest, takes a final drink in honor of the wine god, Dionysus, and goes off to his daily business of spreading wisdom among the citizens of Athens. One of the young guests at this famous banquet was a disciple of Socrates, a young man who was later to immortalize the mental prowess and the physical endurance of his master. The name of this young man was Plato. 2. Plato was one of the favorite children of heaven. Like Goethe, he was endowed with every gift that the gods could bestow upon a mortal: noble ancestry, wealthy parents, good looks, a sound mind in an athletic body. He was nicknamed Plato, it was said, because of his broad shoulders, and a passionate love for wisdom. In his quest for wisdom he came, at the age of 20, under the influence of Socrates, who was 62 years old at the time, 407 BC. Plato worshipped Socrates from the very first. He joined the group of brilliant young intellectuals who followed the gadfly through the streets of the city, and listened with amazement and delight as he stung the wisest men of Athens into an admission of their ignorance. Socrates was ugly as a satyr and gentle as a saint. One of his ablest students, Alcibiades, compared him to those trick statues that were sold in the marketplace of Athens. They have the exterior of a Silenus, a mythological clown, but open them up and you find inside of them the image of a god. Yet it was no godly heights of superhuman wisdom that Socrates was trying to attain. Instead, he modestly devoted himself, as he remarked, to the very human task of asking questions. "There's only one thing I know," he said, and that is that I know nothing." And then he set out to prove to all and sundry that they too, like himself, knew nothing. It was his business to learn and to enable others to learn. "My mother," he said, "was a midwife, and I am trying to follow in her footsteps. I am a mental obstetrician, helping others to give birth to their own ideas." And so he went about the streets of Athens, this philosopher with the homely phrases and the homely features, Saint Socrates with the flattened nose, the thick lips, the projecting eyes, the uncouth body, and the divine thoughts. And everywhere he asked his elementary question, "Toti, what is the meaning of this? What is piety? What is democracy? What is virtue? What is courage? What is honesty? What is justice? What is truth? And what is your business, and what knowledge and skill have you brought to it? Are you a statesman? If so, what have you learned about government? Are you a lawyer? What study have you made of human motives for human actions? Are you a teacher? What steps have you taken to conquer your own ignorance before you can presume to attack the ignorance of others? Toti, information, please." With such questions as these he cross-examined the pundits and exposed their ignorance. But he did this in no vicious mood. He was just as eager to expose his own ignorance. His one object was to acquire truth through the elimination of error. "I pursue the trail of truth like a bloodhound." In the pursuit of truth he neglected his interests, neglected his business. He was a sculptor by trade. Neglected his family. And his shrewish wife Xantippe never lost an opportunity to remind him of this neglect. Socrates was a martyr to philosophy. And what, he asked, is philosophy? That process of thought which enables us to become acquainted with our own personality. Gnoti se auton, know thyself. But most people, when they become acquainted with themselves, are rather disappointed with their new acquaintances. When Socrates removed the mirror of self-flattery from the eyes of the Athenians and held up before them the glass of truth, they were shocked at the result. For they saw in this glass not the reflection of men, but the image of beasts. And like beasts, they began to persecute Socrates. For a number of years they were content to let him off with ridicule, invective, and occasional blows. But then there came a conflagration in the moral atmosphere of Athens, and many of the finer feelings of the citizens were turned into ashes. The Athenians had been defeated in the Peloponnesian War, 404 BC, a war that had been fought between the dictatorship of Sparta and the democracy of Athens. Human decency, the dignity of life, and the sense of individual liberty had received a mortal blow. The tyrant Critias, the leader of the fifth columnists in Athens, had overthrown the free government. And when Critias was overthrown in his turn, the state was plunged into a revolution in which the basest passions of humanity had been let loose. Athens was no safe place for a philosopher to live in, especially for a philosopher who still dared to insist upon the free expression of his thought. One morning, as Socrates came into the marketplace, he found the following indictment posted up against him. "Socrates is guilty of crime. First, for not worshipping the gods whom the city worships, but introducing new divinities of his own. Next, for corrupting the youth. The penalty due is death." The chief instigator of this accusation was a leather merchant by the name of Anytus. This man had a personal grudge against Socrates. For Socrates had advised the son of Anytus to give up the tannery business of his father and to devote himself to the study of philosophy. This criminal corruption of youth, insisted Anytus, deserved nothing less than the death penalty. It was a case of leather against learning, and leather won. Socrates was arrested and placed on trial for his life. Socrates had it within his own power to escape the death penalty. For in accordance with Athenian law, a man condemned to death was permitted to choose exile as an alternative. Furthermore, a number of his wealthy friends, including Plato, had succeeded in bribing the jailer. Socrates could escape if he wished, but he did not wish to escape. His time had come, and he was prepared to go. Throughout his life he had been ready to face danger and, if necessary, death. As a young man he had won the prize for bravery in battle. In his middle age he had dared, as a senator, to defy the entire populace who were clamoring for the death of an admiral accused of cowardice. Several years later he was equally courageous in defying the tyrant Critias. This tyrant had commanded him to bring back to Athens a democratic rebel by the name of Leon, who had escaped